Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal, and the meta for patch 9.1 has been mostly solidified. We have the logs, we have all this data, we have a lot of information on where classes are succeeding and where they are failing. And when taking a look at the broad picture, every single class does at least something good in a variety of different content, be it Mythic Pluses, PvP, or raiding. However, the strive for perfection of better feeling, better playing classes is something that's a long-term process. And I play one of every class in the game. I try to study my classes as best as I can. Taking a look at the information we have from the logs, to the different metrics, to actually just playing these classes and seeing if they're fun at all, I compiled together a list of how Blizzard could improve some of these playstyles going forward. Now, this video will not contain every single spec and every single class because I just wanted to talk about some of my best comfort picks, the classes I've done the most research on and the most gameplay on. And what are my thoughts on how Blizzard could improve on these classes going forward with some simple and sometimes even complicated fixes. As always, if you guys watch these videos but are not subscribed, you might as well hit subscribe. You watch these videos anyway, especially if you want to catch more 9.15 updates going forward on this channel. Hit the bell while you're at it. Let's dive into the video. So this video I'm going to do going by classes in alphabetical order, starting off with Death Knights and ending off with Warriors and Warlocks. Starting off with Frost Death Knight, I love that they added the two-hand playstyle for Frost DKs in Shadowlands. Being able to obliterate my targets over and over has never been as fun as it's been right now. Definitely a more popular PvP playstyle rather than a PvE playstyle, but it's still cool that Frost DKs have options between dual wield and two-hand weapons. Now, Frost DKs have been super fun, but one of the things that I think that could help them is lack of talent variety. Depending when you play dual hand or a dual wield playstyle, there's not a lot of two playstyle options. Take it if you're playing a dual wield DK. A lot of the talents that you would want to run potentially for a obliterate heavy build are just not that good, since you are more inclined, just because of the nature of dual wield, to do more frosty talented abilities, which all synergize so much better, where it doesn't really feel like it's a lot of real talent options, rather certain talents just become mandatory. To alleviate that talent variety, they would probably need to tune abilities or maybe even move them up and down rows. There's even talents from all the expansions that have been suggested before by Frost Death Knights that probably would have a lot better gameplay feel and more competition in the rows if they were swapped out. Also, I would love it for Frost DK to have more than one runic spender. Frost Strike is a fine ability. You can add a conduit where it gives you strength. I've actually been playing around with that one quite a bit, and it's kind of fun juggling that strength buff with all the other strength buffs that Frost DKs already come with. But unlike Unholy, like, I really wish even Glacial Advance just became not a talented ability, but a basic ability, just something for me to hit multiple targets with using my runic power. It would feel fantastic, and with Frost DK not having too many buttons on new keybinds, I think more buttons for them to press is also going to go a long way. Their PvP representation has been pretty low as of recently. The PvP talents I've gotten as a rework in 9.1 just made them a little bit less good. There's just not a lot of variety in that regard, and hopefully they can do some kind of tuning for the PvP, primarily with the PvP talents, to make them a little bit stronger. I think some of the talents I've gotten recently are just not nearly as good as they could be. But I still love my Frost DK. It still is a ton of fun. It's just if I'm really nitpicking, these are some of the issues that I would have with it. Unholy Death Knight is a spec that does really well. It's not a spec that I really been playing a lot with until recently. Everybody I talk to, from my friends to guildies, from people that do mythic raiding to casual players, all say that Frost DK does really well damage wise, but he doesn't feel that good to play. To find out what they mean by it, I had to play it myself in Shadowlands, and while the spec didn't really change too much from the original Incarnation and Legion, minus a couple passives here and there that have gone or been added, the spec is a pretty slower spec. I do find myself slowing down and not have enough runes or runic power to spend, and kind of just waiting for resources to come back little by little. There's also a bit of an issue with desync for cooldowns on the DK, so unless you run specific talents, it's a lot harder to sync in a 45-second cooldown with a minute cooldown with a minute 0.3 cooldown, as things just kind of desync off of one another pretty easily. That, together with some of the slower gameplay, which I personally don't mind as an Unholy DK, I always thought it was more slower, methodical spec, but I could see why people will find it not less fun to play, but the damage is definitely there. Blood Death Knight is another spec that I think is super good, however it gets pretty bullied in LFG. I've seen some really good Blood DKs really show off just how good they are, and I've been told that Blood DK is a spec if you get really good at it. If you can play it really well, it's a very forgiving spec. You can make mistakes. You can go into a trash pool, make a mistake, but as long as you have your mitigations and resource management down, you can correct it without having to have a full group wipe. You can recover. It can be a forgiving spec if you know how to play it. But the skill floor to begin playing that spec is a little high for newer players, and they over time have developed a stigma of not being that good or preferable for Mythic Pluses, even though they're a perfectly fine tank in my eyes, because I've played with some of the better blood DKs out there. It still is one of those specs that gets bullied in LFG, so I wonder if there's something they could do to make it a little bit sturdier baseline for newer players trying to pick up tanking, because I feel like there's not enough people playing tanks in the game, and if Blizzard could make that a little bit easier, we'd have much easier time finding LFG groups. Next class is Druid, and I can't really say much. Guardian Druids feel pretty good to play. I feel like I can get all my undergeared Guardian Druid, pop Incarnation. I feel like a survivable god in Mythic Pluses. It's pretty easy to pick up to. The rest of Druid is also the same as I remember. Lots of healing over time effects, and the addition of an S in PvP is so good for burst healing. We don't even need to talk about Pumpkins since they're doing so well, but we can talk about Feral Druids. Ferals have insanely good boss damage. I mean, they really bite chunks out of bosses, and Feral in our guild does probably some of the best melee damage, even comparable to rogues. They're pretty fun. They're needlessly complicated to play though, and it's kind of sad when they're so difficult to play because they're one of the more punishing melee out there. If you mess up your rotation, a lot of your damage kind of goes down the drain, and they're at the same time a meme spec. So being a meme spec, very difficult to play. Why is it so? Their AoE damage I think could easily be improved, but the meme spec is like you could bring a Feral, but you could also bring a Boomkin, and the Boomkins are probably more viable than Ferals because they can be doing stuff at range and have a lot more utility and an easier time putting out damage. I don't want Ferals to be forever a meme spec, and maybe they need some kind of like a party buff. We've talked about before at the beginning of Shadowlands that more specs should be able to get more buffs. And what if Feral Druids got something like Leader of the Pack? I think it'd be kind of cool. I think right now memes playstyles like Enhancement Shaman do actually have some viability. If you're running a melee heavy composition for your raids or even dungeon, the classes that use melee abilities like warriors, rogues, demon hunters, all of them actually get benefits from Wind Fury Totem. So even Shaman, even as much of a meme spec as it is, actually has some viability in specific builds if your raid group ends up running a specific playstyle or a specific composition. If Ferals get Leader of the Pack as a baseline, party buff for their allies, maybe they will give allies 5% more crit or 4% more crit, 3%, whatever would be a balanced number that isn't busted, because we are talking about crits. Your party members get a crit more often. For Destro Warlocks, that's a literal buff, direct buff to the crit damage of their Chaos Bolt. So you will have some cascading effects, but I feel like a Feral with some kind of a party buff is better than Feral with no buffs at all. Again, I just want Ferals to be more viable, more competitive, and I think that could help them out greatly. When it comes to Hunters, the only thing I have on my wish list is please make them a little bit more tanky. They're literally made of porcelain and they fall over quickly. Just doing a heroic Sanctum of Domination, I never realized just how often I have to use all these different conduits and abilities in order to give myself survivability for mechanics that would just ignore as a rogue. I would just take the AoE hit, maybe hit feint if I really felt like I needed to, but for the most part I wouldn't even mind it. As a hunter, I had to be a lot more conscious of damages going out in AoE to make sure that I just don't fall over. So if they can improve their baseline survivability, I think it would be helpful. In PvP, a lot of people are complaining about the Feign Death legendary interaction with a Feign Death PvP talent for survival hunters, Beastmaster hunters, and marksmanship hunters, but I think if they were to increase the baseline survivability of hunter in general, they could maybe get away from using these kind of pseudo immunities in order to be able to deal with a variety of damage that's going out against them. Also, survival, another meme spec. How could that be fixed? Because survival is genuinely fun to play. I really do enjoy it. It's a weird mix of melee and ranged, but it really works well in Mythic Pluses. The grenades with cleaves, and the fact that cleave and carve are going to have uncapped AoE could have some potential plays with certain covenants. I genuinely think the spec is fun, but if it had more of some kind of a party buff like Enhancement Shaman or a Feral Druid, that would help them out quite greatly. I don't really know what kind of a party buff you would give them. True Shot Aura, or maybe some kind of like a haste buff for their allies, maybe some sort of a stat increase for their party. I genuinely don't know, but some sort of a party buff I think could go a long way. So there at least could be like enhanced shamans, where you could bring him in a specific build and you bring a survival and you kind of build a composition around that survival hunter, whatever buff survival would bring. I'm pretty sure you guys would have much better suggestions on what hunters used to bring from back in the day, like survival in particular, or maybe any of the specs that could work pretty well for survival. Maybe even like a fine weakness debuff mechanic, where sometimes when they crit, they can make the enemy take slightly more damage for their party members. Something cool like that would be interesting. But I think a party buff would make him a little bit less meme worthy in the long run. Mages, for the most part, I'm actually happy with. Frost is doing great, Fire is doing great, Arcane is doing great, so in terms of the damage performance, I can't really comment on much. I can comment on Frost Mage though, but it's more of a personal gripe, but it would be with the heavy RNG of their playstyle and how I feel some of their procs cannibalize one another. When Frost Mages attack an enemy that is frozen, their abilities have the Shatter mechanic, where abilities are more likely to crit, but bosses can be frozen, so you have some procs, debuffs that treat the boss as if it's frozen, like Fingers of Frost procs. Frostbolts have a chance to give you Fingers of Frost, which treat your Ice Lances, which do quite a bit of damage, as if your target is frozen, which get the benefit of Shatter. Frostbolts also can proc your ability of Flurry. Flurry is usually a long cast ability, but it becomes insta-cast when it's procced, and it puts a debuff on the enemy, treating the next 2 attacks against that target as if it's frozen. So if you throw an Ice Lance at it, it'll treat it with a Shatter effect as if the target is frozen. Sometimes when you're pressing your Frostbolts as a Frost Mage and you have a Flurry proc, you'll usually go with the rotation of Frostbolt into Flurry, and then you'll follow up with 2 Ice Lances. But while you're casting Frostbolt into a Flurry, you have a chance to gain Fingers of Frost. You already debuff the enemy with Flurry, with it treated like they're frozen, but you also have the buff for Fingers of Frost, which treats Ice Lances against the target as if it's frozen. These Shatter combos, as far as I understand, don't really stack together, so it cannibalizes 2 procs to basically all be used in the same ability that already gets the benefit. It just doesn't get the benefit twice. So you have this cannibalization of procs where you have 2 things working at the same time that do the same thing, and you kind of losing out the value on at least one of those procs. So if they can solve that for Frost Mage, I feel like the spec would feel a lot better, because it is very RNG in terms of the playstyle. It is a spec that needs to really just stand there and turret the boss in order to get the most damage out of it, but if they could figure out the proc thing for it, I'd be personally happier. Monk as a class is not a bad class. In fact, they do pretty well, but monks to this day are still riddled with bugs. They were very bug heavy and bug boggled back in Shadowlands beta and the alpha, and it took so long for them to become mostly bug free. Bugs still exist though, and they still persist today. Storm, Earth, and Fire, for example, is one of the buggiest abilities monks have ever had, and I'm not a huge fan of that being their biggest damage and ability. Like, when it works, when all these images do the things they're supposed to do, it's fine, but it just doesn't work all the time. So I wonder if maybe there could be some fundamental changes in that regard to remove some of the abilities that cause a lot of these issues, because there's quite a bit of spaghetti code in the game, and monks have quite a bit of the spaghetti code left over from the days of Mists of Pandaria and expansions moving forward. Paladins is another fantastic class. Love to play with them. Holy Paladin is amazing. Really have a lot of fun in PvP with my red pally. Protection Paladin, on the other hand, while a great class by itself, is a very unforgiving class, especially in the pug world. Not a lot of people are willing to give Protection Paladins a try, even though they're not that bad, especially if the player playing the Paladin is pretty good at their class. Protection Paladins get a pretty bad rep in the pug world, very similar to Blood DKs. They're kind of squishy. Like, you need to know how to play your Paladin really well in order to be able to survive things, because while you push out good damage to hold aggro, you are very, very squishy, especially to magic damage. So I wonder if in the future they could shore up some of the basic mitigation and basic defensiveness of Protection Paladins, because they are a very fun class to play. Like, top tier players can make Paladin just look as invulnerable as any other tank in the game, but not every player is a top tier player. So I wonder if they could maybe be given a bit of a leg up in order to be more favorable, especially for the random pug world that we live in today. When it comes to Priest, I can't really say much except for the Shadow. I've been playing quite a bit of Shadow Priest and I've been enjoying it greatly. When 9.1 comes out, I want to try a bunch of different covenants, but for now, I'm enjoying the Kyrian Shadow Priest gameplay for its uniqueness. For Priest, I can't really say much except for Shadow, but can maybe Vampiric Embrace be taken off the GCD? It would feel so amazing as a utility ability, and right now having to spend a whole global on it doesn't feel nearly as good. At least in terms of need, like in Mythic Pluses, when it's an emergency situation and you need snap, second healing for your party, I imagine having this ability off GCD would feel amazing. You also have some great spell cleaving improvements coming out in 9.1.5, and I wonder if Blizzard can continue on that spell cleave improvements, because the multi-dot gameplay for the spec has been a bit of a hit or miss, but depending on how many enemies you pull. For Shamans, there's a lot that I can say. First of all, let's talk about enhancement. I love this spec. Super fun, very enjoyable, really good single target damage, even though it's mired in a lot of RNG. Enhancement Shamans need a bit of more AoE damage. They are pretty okay for AoE. I have fun doing Mythic Pluses with them, but definitely not the biggest AoE class in the game. I like the simplicity of the AoE gameplay, but it's not really a strong AoE gameplay either. It's a more of a focus class. They're really good at sitting on the boss, and take a look at the raid logs. They are doing exceptionally good on boss damage, but they're not being rated super highly on any of the fights that require AoE. They're just outclassed by a lot of the other AoE classes. So enhancement AoE improvement I think would be amazing, but I'm very happy that Wind Fury Totem found its way into becoming something that's actually considered even by some of the top guilds out there. Elemental Shaman is a bit on the flip side. It's actually the reverse problem of enhancement, where enhancement is really good at single target but struggles in AoE. Elemental is exceptionally good for AoE, but struggles a bit on single target in the damage department. And enhancement, while feels fantastic to play for single target and even AoE damage, is fairly smooth. The playstyle is fairly smooth. Elemental is a little bit of a different story. Its AoE feels fantastic. It's single target, however, like a pure single target build with Ice Fury, I'm not a big fan of. Some of the shamans that I've talked to are also not big fans of, so I wonder if they could maybe buff certain abilities that don't lead them into an Ice Fury playstyle, so they have more options for single target, but they definitely need a little bit more help in pure single target situations. And I wonder if that's just going to be one of those things where scaling is going to take over by the end of the expansion, or if they need a little bit of help right now. For Warlock, Demonology pets are still very buggy. Pets misbehave, and that's the problem of playing a class with a lot of that pet AI in terms of its playstyle. Like Tyrant sometimes will just run up and start trying to melee the boss, but they can't melee the boss because they just are a caster mob. Sometimes your pets cannot jump smallest of gaps and they'll just kind of stand there looking at the boss doing nothing. You imps do a variety of wild weird things, and they're called wild imps, but I want them to be like wild with damage, not wild as an unpredictable AI. So for Demonology, if they could just fix some more of the pet bugs, that would be great. Or maybe even redesign the class going on for future expansions to be less so pet oriented. I think this pet project of being able to summon zoos of demons is a cool idea, but when you're dealing with so much pet AI, there's a lot of unpredictability that comes with it. Besides that, Affliction Warlock I feel like needs a little bit more of a buff up for single target damage. I like that they were really good in the first raid for single target, but then they're really heavily dropped off. And I feel like maybe that might be a little bit too far of a fall. Besides that, I didn't mention Demon Hunters because it's been a class that I'm playing around with recently, and I feel like I can't really comment much about it just yet. I want to explore it a little bit more, especially the tank side of things. For Rogues, I play it on the regular, and you guys will definitely see more videos of me talking about Rogues, but Rogues right now are doing really well in patch 9.1. We're actually pretty competitive in Mythic Pluses, we do really well in raiding, and we do really well in PvP. So for Rogues, there's a lot of things I could say for 9.1.5, but for 9.1 right now, we're actually in a pretty good spot. But if you guys have any comments of your own on any classes, what do you think would help them improve? Definitely comment down below. What do you think would help out your class be better? What help out some of your specs that you play be better, whether I named them in this video or not? Thank you guys so much for checking out this video. I do hope you enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in another video.